So in this one, I'll expand from the intro kind of video overview. I'll start to expand some of the things I've said. Let's start with I talked about dramatically the path, the choice that we're making. So let's talk about this. And please watch the first video and try not to get upset and reactive. We'll talk about what is reactiveness versus um, reflectiveness, I guess, is again. So this elevation base versus base camp, like on the mountain. Reactiveness, elevation, reflecting, giving yourself time to think and consider the things that I'm saying, and not just um, as I will describe. We'll go through how the brain, the mind works. That it tends to could be very innately very reactive. So you have to really work at not being reactive, okay? Sort of like Pavlov's dog with his bells, but to things that people say. And unfortunately, the world that we're living in, I talked about this idea of conducting and de-elevating. It is sort of encourages this kind of reactive, we could say in another way, drama queen or um, righteous type behavior is encouraged. It's everywhere in the media. It's all bombarding people everywhere. Is this getting off on righteous base energy, if you like, but it's completely unproductive. Doesn't move us up the mountain. Doesn't move us. In fact, it moves us down the mountain towards our destruction. So ultimately, as we'll discuss in this video, so we've got two paths ahead of us. It's been known in, we could say science, but really meta thinking circles since I would estimate the 1950s, certainly post after the Second World War with the Nazis and the Manhattan Project, the development of splitting the atom with a group of scientists there on that project, Fermi, Oppenheimer, Tesla, these scientists. It was realized around that point in discussions in military and intelligence services that they did all these projects in top secret, um, because knowledge is power, and the military intelligence is how they think. That's how their intellectual resonance is that we want to keep information that is gives America an edge, so we keep it top secret. But the trouble with keeping stuff top secret is that the rest of us can't see what you're doing, and we can't question what you're doing. When they let off the first Manhattan Project test, they thought there was a distinct possibility it could ignite the Earth's atmosphere and destroy the planet, but they still went ahead and did it, and the rest of us didn't get a vote on that. And this is what's happening with technologies in virus development, with genetic engineering, with exotic energy particles, with um, well, we say artificial intelligence, but it really isn't. It's you know combining technology with biological material, and we could go on and on. So this is the sort of the first part of this problem. Now the reason that the secondary reason that they did that, hiding this in what we'll call black sites, is they realized in summer, I don't know because we'll never know, but a realization was made in those circles around that point of what I call the filter event, or it's widely known as the filter event. Just 99.999% of people on the planet don't know about this, but you need to. So, the filter event is that eventually an intelligent civilization will create technologies and start to understand both the laws of physics and also how they themselves work. And at that point, they start to create technologies that potentially can destroy themselves. Now, we saw nuclear power was the first one. We have others already. We have, um, viruses that have been genetically modified. We potentially could have nanobots and nanotechnology. Who knows what's in these labs? Or exotic energy antimatter. These are all technologies, and as we progress, we can create more technologies that are more and more dangerous. So it was reasoned out, war gamed out, if you want to call it, in the 1950s after the Manhattan Project, and realizing the Nazis could have got atomic weapons and destroyed the planet, that, well, this is going to happen. There's no way to, unless we freeze all scientific development, which we're not going to do because we're worried that how can we do that? We can't stop our enemies, Russia at the time, China maybe, from going ahead. We can only control what we're doing, and if we freeze development of pushing the boundaries of science and technology, and they don't, then we're almost ensuring our discretion. So there were nuclear arms race, but what there really was a scientific and technological race between these superpowers to keep ahead. So they weren't going to freeze that, and if you don't freeze it, then it's inevitable that you eventually create this technology and science that eventually even an accident or even a bad actor, someone's liberty. So think of what's happened recently. They're working on, enhancing viruses to make them really deadly, and then someone gets a screw loose and they deliberately release one and we're all dead, or it destabilizes our economic system. Think of what happened the last 2 years, but with something 1,000 or a million times worse. It would have totally destroyed our financial system, and depressions lead to wars is another problem here. Like, think of the Great Depression that led to the Second World War. That was a huge factor, and that's been studied extensively by people that study these things. I've studied it. There's a massive correlation between economic depressions and wars. So all of this was known already in the 1950s. So America and Europeans and other thinking people set out to say, well, how can we stop this happening? How can we stop this inevitable destruction of our civilization? And they named this the filter event. The unfortunate thing to me is that they decided to hide this knowledge from everybody else, and they decided, I call it the parent-child model. They decided, well, the average person doesn't understand science, they don't reason very well, they won't be able to stand these issues. I think it's better if we just keep this under wraps and we just don't tell anyone. Now the problem with that was it meant they started to take actions from 1950 onwards to prevent, in their mind, prevent the destruction of the planet through the filter event. But the actions they were taking didn't make any sense in the real world to people. So then that's a problem. So what it created is this separation between the real powers that be, who were the powers that be really pulling the strings, have been since the 1950s, and even before that is the military and in the intelligence services, who have all these scientists hidden away with non-disclosure, bullet in the head if you try to talk, working on all of this in secret with no oversight, with all this knowledge that they can't allow the so-called, what people perceive to be the power, their politicians and other people can't have access to that. They can't trust that these politicians. So when the politician asks, do you have a crashed alien spacecraft, even if they did, I don't know, we will never know, but if they did, they sure as hell couldn't tell them. So how do they not tell them, or other work that they're doing? They can't. It creates this, what I call fake reality that the rest of us have to live in, away from this actual reality that these people are working on. They have to create a separation, and this is what people refer to the deep state. This is really what the deep state is. It's a buffer between the fake power, the politicians, and the real power, which is the real powers that be, who are these military intelligence and technologists in the know, who are technology companies, people in them who are prepared to work with them. It used to be called the military industrial complex, but we could sort of broaden that to include technologists, and I would say even the banking system, because the banking and financial sector got pulled in because they needed them to control the economy so that we didn't have a depression. Because remember, depressions could lead to a country using these catastrophic weapons. This is what's happened all through history. So they also had a part of this plan to create a global interconnected electronic economy as the only way to prevent any single country having a depression that sort of spreads and brings down everybody else. You notice since the 1930s, we have never had another depression. Now, we've had short-term major recessions. You could think of the 2008 crisis, 1987, early 1990s. I mean, I've worked, studied and built financial models for 22 years for myself, studying all this. So I can tell you with absolute certainty what has been going on about all of this. They deliberately created this system into the early 1980s to economically defeat Russia and China and bring them into this system, which is what they did, um, as part of this plan. So they needed the help of the banking and financial sector. But then we started to get problems. So whenever there's a problem, they have to, it's sort of like the control they have is like blowing up a balloon gives them control. We could call this thing, they call it the credit bubble, or the too big to fail credit bubble. But every so often it almost hits a nail and explodes and crashes everything, which could lead to this war, this filter. So they have to let the air out. So you'll get they'll say there's a crisis like 2007-9, but actually they manufactured that. They created that. They did it. All of these crises you've seen have all been under the control of this system since the 1950s. They can't allow anything out of control, because that something out of control would risk a real war that destroys all of us. This is the very important thing to understand. They can create wars and they can create financial crises, but they have to be all under control. What they can't have is real wars and real financial crises that would destabilize the system and risk a global third world war, or unleashing chemical or all sorts of other horrific weapons that people don't even know about. So this is really, but the problem with that, it creates a separation. So then your politicians, who people think that they are voting for to do X, Y, Z, and then everyone sees they never do what they're saying. But the main reason they don't do what they're saying is because they don't have any power to do what they're saying in this system. And most of them probably don't realize it. They just think they're being blocked by this administrative, bureaucratic deep state. Some of them do realize it and play along, or involved in this as well. But it's all a fake reality show. It's a show, and you can sort of see that these politicians are like celebrities. They're dumb as a post, most of them. I mean, let's be honest, they're not the great minds of our world at all. You would think if this system was for real, we'd be putting people there who are really smart, but we don't. So that shows you another element of this, that this is just a fake show, along the lines of what I'm saying. And it needs to be, because if we actually trusted the fate of the world to these people, we'd be dead by now. We would have had a third world war. I mean, think about it. I mean, they're mostly kind of sociopathic, psychopathic individuals, if you really look into it. But they're, egotistical, narcissistic, perfect for, just like most celebrities. It's celebrity culture, and this is kind of very similar. But this is really what's been going on, this separation. Now, as part of this plan that's been in effect, first they created this global financial system to try and prevent depressions, control demolitions. There's a problem there, which I discussed. I made some videos that, this current incarnation of the financial system, I call it financial alchemy, since around 1998, an event called LTCM, and particularly 2008, the central bank have had to go to more and more extreme measures, or the financial wing of this powers that be, quantitative easing, essentially creating trillions of dollars out of thin air and throwing it to create asset bubbles deliberately, is sort of reaching the end of its lifespan. We always knew this. I wrote a paper in 2001 predicting that by 2030 this system would become unstable, and that they wouldn't allow that, because that's risk, right? We can't allow instability. Everything has to be controlled. I was actually contacted by a strange, extremely wealthy, almost billionaire, who asked me to join his think tank to discuss what I was saying. A very interesting incident. I would say one of these people in the powers that be, who wanted to basically figure out, I believe, how I had put this together. It was concerning probably to them. But anyway, that's a story I can tell elsewhere. It's very strange. But what I was saying in 2000, 2001 was that this system would become stable. They wouldn't allow it. They would transition us off. And that's what they're doing now. So now we're starting another controlled demolition. The difference to the ones that you've seen the last 20, 30 years is they were very quick. They wanted to get them over quickly, deflate the balloon a little bit, and then reinflate it. The difference this time is that they want to move to a completely different system. So they're going to slowly deflate the balloon to keep everybody in until the last minute. They don't want you to get out, and then swap us to this other system. And actually, what they're doing makes a lot of logical sense, but I'm not going to turn this video. They're going to move us to a digital currency system, remove credit cards and paper cash and this digital money, where they can actually control what we buy and sell from a centralized computer or AI, basically. And there's very complicated reasons that I know, I may have mentioned in other videos. It's about matching supply and demand to free them from issues with, as you're seeing now with inflation. They're deliberately creating this crisis, by the way. They've deliberately created this price inflation crisis to justify moving to a system where they can completely control that by matching supply and demand, by essentially controlling what you can spend your money on in the future. But that's a big discussion. But actually, it makes a lot of sense, and we should have done this a very long time ago, because it will free the ability to create essentially infinite money at this point, infinite velocity and infinite money. Right now, you can't give people money because it creates inflation. This system will prevent that. That is true. But the price of it is the loss of autonomy over, and freedom over your own spending, and limits in general on resources. But I'll make a separate video. We can go down the rabbit hole and discuss all that. These are all, so this is all these different elements of what's happening. But that has kind of accelerated their concern over the filter as well. They're like, well, if we're going to have to do this, we'll use this to get what we want. And what they want is, as I say, is they need to control people. They need more control over people. They, not just your spending, but they need to control your movement. They need everybody to be trackable, like a wireless trackable device. So they need to make you literally trackable like a wireless device. And there's technological ways of doing that. I don't know exactly because I'm not involved in that science, but I mean, I think it is quite possible, which is building up graphene oxide or variants of this in the body over time, over a 10-20 year period, and it essentially turns humans into wireless devices that would be trackable. Another way would be to inject something into the body that would make you trackable. I think it's pretty obvious if you look at the last couple of years how that could be done. I mean, obviously you wouldn't tell people that's what you're doing because people would not want you to do that, but you find the other reasons that are going on in our world to inject people en masse and build this kind of tech up in their bodies. And so you need to control spending, you need trackable wireless individuals to track all their movements, so that way we can build AIs that can be predictive if people are going to make mistakes or be bad actors with this dangerous technology. We can prevent them being the person that takes the virus out of the lab. We can actually prevent that. That's the aim here. So to themselves, they're doing a good thing. Now this is all what I call the left-hand path. I said there's two paths. This is the left-hand path, and it all sounds completely reasonable because it is reasonable from a logical standpoint once you understand it, as a lot of scientists have for 80 plus years. Just the average person doesn't know anything about this because they don't do, they're not involved in sort of the limit of science and what could be happening here. There's a third element to this, which is even if you do all that, humans are irrational. That's their nature. So they want to change the biological computer itself that produces this irrationality. They want to modify it to be less irrational and more rational. Sort of like Spock's character from Star Trek. Remember, he comes from a planet, they are all emotional and irrational, and she destroyed themselves, and then they discovered the merits of logic and reason. And this is sort of the mentality of the left-hand path. This is the direction we want to go. But how do we change the biological computer? Well, we need genetic engineering. So they've been progressing with that technology. How do you deliver that technology? Again, it's injectable, right? So you've got to inject people en masse. But the problem, and I can't go into this in this video, but there's a problem in scientific method that you can't actually perfect that technology in a lab. because of the amount of genetic variation, what we call, well, genetic variation and what we call gene expression and epigenetics. I can say I will eventually go down a rabbit hole on each of these things and we can discuss it. The point is that that can't be done in a lab. The only way you can develop that tech is to give it to everybody essentially and do that experiment en masse in the world and find the problems and then try and change it. And the sort of technology you would need is what we call reverse transcription. It's called a technology that can modify genes and also intracellular, that can get into inside cells and modify cells to modify gene expression. And there is a technology that can do that. It's called mRNA. You might have heard of it. And you would have to do what I said. I have to be careful what I say because I might put this on YouTube, and everything or anyone in science or scientists that have tried to talk about this, it all gets filtered because the powers that be are obviously wary of anyone who understands it like me or anyone else saying something. So they have AIs. You may not be aware of this, but it's true. It's not not even close to a conspiracy. It means that I've had various videos removed. They look for keywords or anything, so I have to say things in a certain way. Maybe this will get through it, maybe it won't. That's why you won't hear about any of this. I mean, they have been very sophisticated in their censorship of all this knowledge. It's not that hard, actually. I mean, they've controlled the media for 80 years, and they control everything that's out on the media, and now they control the internet and can filter all this stuff. Apart from a few platforms that I will try to put this out on. So that gives you a sort of basic idea, and it sounds completely reasonable in a way. I mean, this could well work. You would think, and I'll be honest. When I was a student, I thought ahead, and I actually figured all this out for myself. I call it the Delta Dirac moment, and I realized that this would happen, and that logically, I'm a high logic person. That logically this made sense, and they're all high logic people, probably higher logic than me, and this is what they reason. But they don't have the symphonic perception. The problem is that about that journey through intellect, when you go deep down the intellectual journey, in knowledge acquisition in particular, as they are trying to acquire the knowledge to do this, it completely cuts you off from these other perceptions. So you don't even consider them, and you just think it's nonsense, and you have no interest to even examine them. Okay, it's sort of like, if the two different focuses, the two perceptions, the more you focus this intellectual knowledge in, it totally blurs the symphonic perception, this outside perception. So that's the problem we have. Because if you had the symphonic perception, you would realize that doing this path, whilst it will get us possibly through the filter, it effectively destroys us by changing our biological computer, making human 2.0, who is incapable of ever having this symphonic perception. You cut that off. You turn us into what I call glorified calculators. That's essentially what Spock was. I mean, if you're going to do that, you might as well just build AIs and computers. I mean, that the point of a human is being human, right? It's the human experience and the balance of your intellect against your symphonic self. It's the act of trying to balance these two things, reason and logic, and against this other perception. But they don't understand that because they're totally focused in this knowledge acquisition stage, expression of that part of what I call the collective consciousness. And it's done this before, and the job of those of us that can perceive it is to try and get through, which is the only way you're going to get through to them is using their language, which is why you need to both understand science and this other perspective. You need both. They're not going to listen to this other perspective. You've got to be able to talk their language, which is why I went away and studied the brain and scientific method and all these things, so I can, if I ever got the chance, as I did in that other post in 2001, explain the logical fallacies, as it's known. It's really a lack of intellectual humility that they're expressing here. They haven't realized the limits of their knowledge or of their understanding. Like I said, they haven't even reached meta thinking, questioning really, or meta thinking. So they're sort of children with matches about to burn down the house, who are perceived as incredibly smart, like all these scientists and that are wheeled out on television. They're smart in respect of their knowledge of a certain area, but dumb as hell in terms of this other perception, there's other types of intelligence. And this is, if Oppenheimer and the Manhattan had ignited the atmosphere and killed us all, there'd have been no one here to say it, but you would have seen that was dumb as hell. And that's another example of that same type of reasoning. They will always put their own personal desire to push the boundary over the good of everybody else, right? So that's the left path. And there's another problem with the left path. I mean, that's a problem enough that it's completely flawed, as I've just described. But the most likely thing that also going to happen is that not everybody wants to go along with that. And the groups that don't go along with it is effectively creating a war. That I don't know if that's what's happening with China and Russia against the United States and Europe now, but I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, it's difficult to say. It could also just be part of the plan, which is to create another distracting war that everyone focus on, that creates price rises and problems as part of changing this economic system. I'm not in the know to say. It could be either of those. I mean, it is known that Putin was part of the World Economic Forum, so that in some ways to me is more plausible, especially the timing of it. The media is always going to sell you like, these people are just crazy, they're just doing these things. These people aren't crazy. I mean, they have teams of brilliant people wargaming and scenario out everything and this, if you like a game of chess, and they don't do things on a whim. Okay, that's just more propaganda from the media. I mean, this is what they're always telling people. I call it the idiocracy fake reality. They always claim people are just being stupid politicians. Oh, we did this because we were stupid, or we did that. The reason for all the actions of these politicians and respect to everything in the world is because they're essentially puppets of this real powers that be, this military intelligence technocracy, who have been controlling things since the 1950s. And they're prepared to take the fall because every 4 or whatever years they're out of there, and so it doesn't matter. A lot of them are probably just useful idiots who don't realize that they're being used in this way. I think some of them do know that they are, but either way, that is what is going on in the world. So it sort of doesn't matter whether your elections are real or not, because they're not real in this sense. For example, if a politician came forward who said, at this point in this world, like, we're not going to have any censorship in our country. We're going to investigate, XYZ that was against this agenda. I guarantee you that politician would be dead within an hour, and there would be a convenient story of what happened to them, illness or whatever. This is the world that we live in. It's a world that most people just don't want, or not able to see, or do not want to see, is most of the point. In my life experience, I've seen from very young that most people just can't cope with seeing it. If you ever asked yourself why the Nazis were able to do what they did, it's exactly the same reason, and we've seen this all through history. The average person is in their physical or early intellectual stage of development, their symphonic self, which means they will go along with and not challenge or stop this kind of base energy vibration. So, of course, the Germans in early 1930s, most people saw what was happening, but they put their head down, and that's the same thing in our world. People don't perceive that that's what they're doing, but they are. They do the same thing. They put their head down by obsessing over their personal security, their personal wealth, their bucket list, their fun, I don't want to hear about any of this, whatever it is, because it's upsetting to me and I can't deal with it. But that's just what the Germans did, and this is what's happened all through history. And that works to a point until the shit hits the fan, and then they say, oh God, why didn't I do something, or why didn't I, it's always easier in hindsight, right? So those of us that have that hindsight and foresight by this other perception try to wake people up, if you want to use that horrible, I hate that term, but it won't work, because you're up against the biology of their brain, you're up against their journey on the mountain, in a symphonic position on the mountain, there's no way. Anybody that's tried to do this knows this in their life. You 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 can't make somebody think about something they don't want to think about, and most people do not want to think about almost anything. They just want to get through this experience as they perceive it, get from birth to the grave with the least, like, what they perceive as stress or being upset as possible, and that's what leads to this. And the thing is that these powers that be, particularly the military intelligence, have studied all the brain sciences I have and all of this stuff, and they know all this, and they know exactly how to keep the average person wanting to keep their head down. They simply distract them with financial insecurity. They keep them off balance financially, in fight or flight mode, worrying about their futures. So the world that you live in now is part of this process. They're just constantly creating crisis. They're fake crisis. They're creating them, one after another, to keep everybody off balance, to keep their head down and not really there. If you talk to them, of course, and in that moment they might say, oh, this is bad, or this is, what's going on, but they don't really want to. I said to someone recently, do you really want to know what's going on? Because as Mark Twain said, people like you to make them think, but they don't like you to make them really think. So when they say, what do you think's going on, they just want to have a casual confirmation of the fake lies that they want to believe and are being told. But what they don't want is to really be told the truth that I'm telling you in this video. It's too much. But that's our problem. The too much, and the people being essentially controlled by all these distractions. Celebrity culture elevating narcissists and people with money, as if they, with millions of online subscribers, and this sort of cesspit of social media, of all the sort of righteousness. It's all part of this system, to keep everybody de-elevated away from talking about the issues in this video. And it ultimately is going to lead to our destruction on a worse scale than anything the Nazis did. Because ultimately, once they start, first of all, we're in the experimentation stage with all this. We've got that they're going to reduce fertility rates. They're also going to, depopulating old and sick people, because we don't need them, right, in this new system. Let's just keep the productive stock. You can think of it as farming. Let's keep the sort of younger, productive stock under control. Control their movements, control their spending. This is the world they're moving to. And eventually removing their humanity, their emotion, through technology, reverse transcription, and otherwise. This is all going to happen over the next 10 to 15 years. So if you take the Germany analogy, you're in 1931 Germany, right? I mean, that's the sort of deal. And yeah, you can keep your head down, and I understand it, but this is the consequence, is that we will have no chance to stop this. We have very little chance to stop it, and never did. But that's the left-hand path. Let me tell you what the right-hand path is. In the right-hand path, which is the path we could, potentially, if we could get people to pull their head up out of their parts of their anatomy and stop being so fearful and greedy and self-absorbed, which is what it really amounts to when they say, I can't deal with this. We actually have an amazing future possible. We could take some of the positive elements of what they're doing there. We could live in a world where we recognize this symphonic self, and that we change scientific method to investigate this, and we take our children and we teach them everything about what we really are, this immortal, experiencing entity, and optimize all of education instead of trying to suppress people and control people, which is what it is now, to unbound people, to truly understand this symphonic being that we are. And we could do all that now, because we are not limited anymore by finances and resources. That's all could be ended, as they're going to show us with this new financial system. So we would go into a singularity where we basically start to really understand what we are. We wouldn't be so caring about the rules of physics and technology anymore. It's about strengthening this connection and evolving our true selves. and it would be, pretty much a utopia, and we would eliminate most of the problems of this world, greed that's generated by greed and fear and these base energies and financial inequality. We wouldn't have any of that anymore. People wouldn't be, because we wouldn't have a bunch of greedy people where we have now 1% of people owning 99% of the wealth, or even 0.0001% owning 99.9% of the wealth. All of those things would go away. There wouldn't be people's motivations. So it would be a world driven by the desire to, as Jesus, sort of what Jesus would say, to be better, or I call elevated human beings, altruism, caring about other people, unconditional love. But we would also make massive strides in effectively science, because we wouldn't be bounded by intellect in the same way that we are. But that's a bigger discussion. It would literally be, for most people, the only people that wouldn't like that would be people in the early physical stage, and we could create an environment for those people to experience that. But for everyone else, it would be a far, far better world where you're not spending your entire life having to fit into a system with a sort of essentially a constructed identity from childhood and whatever the world around you, and being controlled by these powers, manipulated essentially, conducted, as I call it, manipulated. But we're never going to get there if we take the left-hand path. I think we probably will take the left-hand path. I've always said for 30 years, I've foresaw this, that this is what is almost inevitable. But those of us that can see this should still try to say, and the small problem, we still got to be who we are and explain this. But it's going to be the Delta Direct moment that I said 35 years ago. There's a moment in time which we've already taken it. We're getting close to that. I'd say we're within about 10 years of it being inevitable, and at that point, nothing we can do or anyone could say could change it. Once they start changing people's biology so that they are then unable to even understand what I am saying or question, or are just more controllable human beings, at that point you've taken the left-hand path no matter what. And I'd say we're within 5 to 10 years of this being executed, this plan. It's certainly in progress as we speak around us. And they have absolutely they believe in what they're doing, as I laid out at the beginning of this video. So they are very driven, and they have no moral, ethical issues with it, because they believe we're the parent and we're doing the right thing for the children here, the farm animals, I would say, who they deem that everyone out there in this world is too stupid and dumb animal to be involved in any of this. This is how they perceive everyone. So they think it's okay to deceive everybody using the tools I've gone through in this video. So essentially, the average person is in a mind prison, is a mind slave from birth, conditioned into this mind prison, unable to see it unless they are likely at this questioning or meta onwards phase of their development. In other words, I could say they have a divergent biological computer that is capable of perceiving it, which is very few people. In my life's experience, is 1 to 10% of people. But if we could get all 10%, then we probably could stop it. Also, if we could get access to some of these decision, the real power here, who are not listening or watching my videos, but if that could apart from that one time, if they could, which is why another reason I put this out, maybe it's possible for people who understand this to get through to them. I think, if I was given that opportunity, I really think I could. I've had a couple of discussions with scientists in my life that I met that I think are kind of involved with this, and it took a long time, but eventually I did get through to one of them. I could, definitely. So I think it is possible, but it takes a lot of back and forth to get there, and I would always be open to that possibility. So he was initially of the opinion that I would, that this is the plan. I would say from logic that I would have done this, and I said no, I wouldn't. I understand it from a logical standpoint. Everyone does that's looked at it. We understand why the world is the way it is and why they believe they have to control everybody like this. And as I've gone through this filter, but I said I disagree because of my symphonic perception, when that's what takes a lot of time to get through to them, and why, how to give them that to see it. But also we can see in brain sciences, as I went through with this guy, George. There's 3 PhDs and working on God knows what, but we could talk science. I could talk the science to him, and eventually I went through some of this brain sciences and he could understand, and then I started to get through to him. So that it is possible, but it's if we don't make the videos, we don't talk, it's definitely not going to happen. I definitely think our odds are about 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000 of preventing this at this point. They've gone so far with this, with what they're doing, and they will find more reasons to keep injecting people. It doesn't matter what the reason is. They will find reasons, because this is what this is really about, not what they're saying. Again, I have to be careful what I say. It's not going away. It won't. All the events that you're seeing will keep accelerating. They've gone too far. They can't pull back from what they're doing now. But we do still have a good 10-15 years window to change off the left-hand path to the right-hand path. When I do say left-hand, right-hand, I think it reverses on the screen, but anyway. Alright, so I just wanted to explain that. I mean, there's a lot more detail we could go into there, but, maybe you can sort of, see some of this a little bit, but, yeah, I'm going to stop this video here, and there's a lot of other things that I said I would cover, so I'll stop this one and we'll get to them. Okay, take care.